I'm joined now on the set by our always chic business editor, Charles Pellegrin. Charles, where are the people holding your suit as you walk in?
I'm afraid we don't have the budget for that.
Yeah, not today, not today. All right, today we're going to focus on agriculture and food production, specifically the carbon emissions of that sector. And there's a new report that's outlining a plan to make that sector carbon neutral by 2050.
And that report was released by the World Bank Group this Tuesday. It urges for an overhaul of what it calls the agri-food system because it is making, quote unquote, the planet ill, and underlines that a focus on agriculture is now one of the recent trends that we're seeing in the climate agenda. Agri-food currently represents about a third of global greenhouse gas emissions, and the report finds that with some crucial changes, it could lead to some massive gains in the fight to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, with a return on investment actually outweighing costs by 16 to 1. Well, to find out more on what these changes are and more in general, we're joined on the line by Julian Lampietti, who is a global agriculture practice manager at the World Bank. Thank you for joining us on France 24. I'm going to dive right in here. The report suggests different courses of action depending on the income level of the country applying these measures. Developing nations represent the biggest chunk of emissions, about 3/4 of all emissions for the sector. What does the report suggest for these countries?
Thank you so much for having me on the show, Charles, and it's great to see you. So I think the key is we can all do something about the opportunities that are here. Developing countries should avoid making the mistakes that countries made, and they can do a lot around things like land use, the way they're farming, the way they're producing crops like rice and livestock. And all of those things with some small changes can produce good jobs, good incomes, and good environmental outcomes.
And in terms of funding these changes, the report suggests redirecting agricultural subsidies, for instance, so which are qualified in the report as wasteful. I'm just thinking, considering the protests we've seen in Europe, but also in other places, over some of these types of subsidies, fuel subsidies, for instance, wouldn't that be a very tricky thing to implement?
That's a great point, and food is a very, very complicated issue. And what the report is suggesting is repurposing money that is being spent in the sector to deliver better outcomes. So it's definitely not suggesting taking anything away from people. What it's suggesting is how can we do better with what we have? And so, for example, there's a lot of subsidies out there that should be reviewed and carefully thought of, and that if you tweak them slightly, you can actually produce good environmental outcomes and increase your productivity at the same time.
There's been some reporting on the World Bank's report this Tuesday already in French media, and there's one article by Le Monde that quotes one expert on sustainable food systems that says the measures outlined in the report are welcomed, but they don't go far enough. That, for instance, optimizing the use of fertilizer, using green energy, or precision agriculture, those are only progressive and marginal evolutions. Do you have any response to that kind of criticism?
Well, I think we need to start with what we have, and the technologies you listed are really good examples of things we can do right now. And if we all lean in on this, we're going to have a huge impact and really accelerate the change. Just think of the energy transition, where the technologies were known for a long time, and only now are we seeing massive changes and a huge increase in speed. And that's what we want to achieve in agriculture and food.
In developed nations, in the report, the onus is on customers and consumers to change some of their dietary habits. But those can be extremely entrenched. I'm thinking, for instance, the consumption of meat in Western countries that's really entrenched in the diet here. How do you foresee that changing?
But to be very clear, the report is offering people choices and pointing out the impacts of the different things they do. So it's not saying don't eat meat. It's just saying realize the full cost of what you're doing and make your choices accordingly. And it is a very difficult political set of decisions. But really, it's not what you should do, it's what you could do for the world.
And finally, there is a massive financing challenge for this plan. Currently, only 2.4% of global climate finance is actually directed towards the agri-food sector. What can we do, and what can the World Bank do to change that?
That's a great question. So the sector is massive, accounts for 30% of emissions, and only receives 2% of the finance. So the World Bank is looking at all sorts of ways to increase the financing opportunities, to channel existing funds through country programs as well as different climate finance instruments, and make sure that all goes to the sector and that we can provide the sector with reliable, monitorable, verifiable results.
Julian Lampietti is I'm looking for his title again here, Global Agriculture Practice Manager at the World Bank. Thank you for being with us on France 24.
Thank you so much for having me, and have a wonderful day.
That's it for this segment so far.
All right. Thanks for that, Charles. Charles Pellegrin there with your business update.